I am Stella, 33 years old, and I work as a senior forensic accountant, tracking down hidden assets for a living. I spent my entire life trying to earn the love of a family that only saw me as a disposable nuisance. On Christmas Eve, they literally kicked me out into a blinding blizzard with nothing but a garbage bag laughing while they stole the home I paid for. They called me a desperate failure who could not survive on her own. They had absolutely no idea that a dusty wooden puzzle box left by my late grandfather held a nameless black bank card. A card that would not only prove I owned the very ground they stood on, but would give me the power to send them all to federal prison. Before I tell you exactly how I tore down their fake high society lifestyle brick by brick, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe toxic family members deserve exactly what is coming to them. The wind whipping off the Long Island Sound was brutal that night. I stood on the freezing stone porch of my parents' massive estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, shivering in a thin cardigan. The snow was falling fast already, coating the expensive manicured driveway. The heavy oak front door was wide open, spilling warm yellow light out onto the ice, but none of that warmth was meant for me. My mother, Cynthia, stood in the doorway wearing a cashmere wrap that cost more than my first car. Her face perfectly preserved by expensive procedures twisted into a sneer of pure disgust. She held a cheap black plastic trash bag in her manicured hands. Inside were the few basic items of clothing I had kept at my apartment. Without a single word of explanation, she hurled the heavy bag straight at my chest. The plastic hit me hard, bursting open upon impact with the icy stone porch. My clothes scattered across the wet snow. "Pick up your trash and get off my property," Cynthia said. Her voice was as cold as the winter air. "We are hosting the holiday gala tonight, and I will not have my guests seeing a pathetic mess lingering around the front door." I stared at my scattered sweaters, trying to process the sudden violence of the moment. I had arrived for our mandatory Christmas Eve dinner straight from a grueling week at my accounting firm. Instead of a greeting, I was met with an ambush. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, my teeth beginning to chatter. "Where is the rest of my stuff from the apartment?" My father, Harrison, stepped out from the warm hallway to stand beside my mother. He held a glass of expensive bourbon, looking down at me with the same disappointment he had directed my way since I was a child. "Your apartment is no longer yours, Stella," he declared flatly. "I contacted the building manager this morning and terminated the lease. The locks have already been changed and your remaining junk has been cleared out." Panic flared in my chest. "You cannot do that," I protested, stepping closer to the door but stopping when my father held up a hand. "I pay the rent on that apartment every single month. I have never missed a payment." "You pay the rent, but I am the primary legal signer on the lease," Harrison reminded me with a smug, self-satisfied grin. "I put my name on that paperwork 5 years ago because your credit was insufficient for that building. As the primary leaseholder, I have the absolute legal right to terminate the contract whenever I see fit. I saw fit to do it today." But why, I asked, the freezing wind biting through my clothes? Where am I supposed to go on Christmas Eve? My younger sister, Madison, appeared behind our parents. At 29, Madison was the undisputed golden child of the family. She was a lifestyle influencer whose entire online persona was built on projecting an image of effortless wealth. She leaned against the doorframe, her perfect hair cascading over a designer silk dress. "Do not be so dramatic," Stella Madison scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Jamal and I need that space. His trading firm is expanding, and he needs a secondary private office to set up his new trading floor monitors. Your tiny little tech setups were just taking up valuable real estate in a prime building." Jamal stepped up right behind Madison, wrapping his arms around her waist. He was 32, a charismatic day trader who had recently married my sister. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that easily cost $5,000, complete with a flashy gold watch that caught the porch light. He looked down at me with absolute contempt. "Nothing personal," Stella Jamal said, offering a bright, empty smile. "Business is booming. My investors are demanding more attention, and I need a dedicated suite in the city. You understand how high finance works, right? Or maybe you do not, considering you just sit behind a desk looking at spreadsheets all day. You are just a glorified calculator. We need the space for real money-making operations. You are kicking me out into a blizzard so your husband can put more computer monitors in my living room. I asked Madison, my voice shaking with a mix of freezing cold and rising fury. You are 33 years old. Madison shot back, her tone dripping with venom. You are single, you are aging terribly, and you work a boring corporate job. You bring absolutely zero value to this family name. Jamal is actually building an empire. He is making us millions. The least you can do is get out of his way and stop being such a burden on our parents. Jamal smirked, tossing a crumpled $50 bill at my feet in the wet snow. I stared down at the crumpled green paper slowly absorbing freezing moisture from the ground. I did not cry. I did not yell. I did not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I simply bent down, picked up the wet $50 bill, and put it in my pocket. I looked at my mother, my father, my sister, and her arrogant husband. I memorized the smug expressions on their faces. I turned my back on them without a single word. I walked down the long, winding driveway, leaving my scattered clothes behind in the snow. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me. The cold cut straight through my thin cardigan, biting into my skin like tiny needles. The icy wind matched the absolute numbness taking over my mind. I walked for over 2 miles through the affluent streets of Greenwich. Massive mansions glowing with festive holiday lights mocked my situation. Families were inside, sitting by warm fireplaces, unwrapping gifts and sharing laughter. I kept walking until I reached a commercial intersection. Using Jamal's wet $50 bill, I hailed a rideshare to a cheap motel on the outskirts. I paid for a single night in cash. The room smelled of stale smoke. The radiator rattled violently, barely pushing out enough heat to thaw my frozen hands. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, still wearing my damp clothes. I pulled my small leather work tote onto my lap. It was the only item I had brought to my parents' house, expecting to have a miserable dinner and drive back to my apartment. I had no apartment to go back to now. My entire adult life had been erased with a single phone call from my father. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. They had completely forgotten about my grandfather. My grandfather, Charles, had been a brilliant, secretive real estate tycoon. He built an empire out of nothing. He was a hard man, pragmatic and sharp, but he had always treated me differently. He saw past my parents' shallow obsession with status. He saw the genuine analytical mind I possessed. Before he passed away 5 years ago, he summoned me to his hospital room. Everyone else was waiting in the hallway, eager to hear about their inheritance. Grandpa Charles handed me a small, intricately carved wooden puzzle box. It was heavy, crafted from dark walnut and sealed with a complex locking mechanism. I asked him what was inside. He gripped my hand with surprising strength for a dying man. I am giving them the illusion of control. He whispered, his eyes locking onto mine. Your father is a greedy, foolish man who cares only for appearances. Your mother is worse. I know exactly what they will do when I am gone. They will step on anyone to elevate themselves, and they will target you, because you do not play their sick games. Keep this box hidden. Do not let anyone know you have it. I promised him I would keep it safe. Then he gave me his final instruction. He told me to only open the box when they finally showed me their true faces. He said I would know exactly when that moment arrived. When they leave you with absolutely nothing, that is when you unlock it, he rasped. That is when you take it all back. For 5 years, I kept that puzzle box hidden in my work tote. I brought it with me everywhere, terrified my family might snoop through my apartment and find it. Through all their insults, their condescending remarks, and their blatant favoritism of Madison, I had kept the box closed. I kept hoping they would change. I kept holding on to the desperate illusion that maybe they loved me. Tonight they had thrown my belongings into a blizzard and left me homeless on Christmas Eve so my sister's husband could have a nicer office. The illusion was shattered. They finally showed me their true faces. My fingers were stiff from the cold as I pulled the wooden box from my bag. The puzzle mechanism was a series of sliding panels. Grandpa Charles had taught me how to solve these types of boxes when I was 10 years old. I slid the first panel to the left, pushed the top piece forward and engaged the hidden spring at the bottom. With a soft click, the wooden lid popped open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked inside the velvet-lined compartment. Nestled in the center was a thick, heavy metal card. It was matte black with no bank logo, no name, and no expiration date. The only identifying mark was a 16-digit sequence embossed across the front and a routing number engraved on the back. It felt like solid iron. Underneath the black card lay a small brass safety deposit box key. It bore the crest of an exclusive private wealth bank located in the heart of Manhattan. And beneath the key was a single piece of heavy parchment paper. I unfolded the paper carefully. It was a handwritten note from Grandpa Charles. I read the words aloud in the quiet motel room. My dearest Stella, if you are reading this, the worst has happened. Harrison and Cynthia have let their greed consume them. I knew they would eventually try to sacrifice you to protect their own fragile egos. They think they inherited my empire. They think they hold the keys to the kingdom. They are entirely wrong. I never trusted your father with my life's work. I trusted you. You have the analytical mind required to see the truth. You have the strength they lack. This card is your master key. This key opens the vault to your birthright. Go to the Manhattan branch. Present the card to the branch manager. The trust is waiting for its true owner. Take back what is yours, Stella. Do not show them an ounce of mercy. They certainly showed you none. The sun rose on the day after Christmas, casting a harsh, glaring light against the dirty motel window. I had not slept a single minute. I sat on the edge of the mattress, clutching the heavy metal card and the brass key. My mind raced with possibilities, processing my grandfather's final message. I needed to get to Manhattan immediately. I threw on my still damp cardigan and headed out to catch the earliest commuter train into the city. The ride was a blur of gray winter landscapes and the rhythmic clacking of the tracks. My body ached from the cold, but my focus remained razor sharp. I arrived in the financial district just as the morning rush began. Towering skyscrapers loomed above me, casting long shadows across the icy pavement. I found the address printed on the back of the brass key. It was an incredibly imposing building made of polished granite and dark glass. A highly discreet brass plaque near the heavy revolving doors read, "Sterling Heritage Trust." This was clearly not a normal commercial bank. It was a private wealth management firm catering exclusively to the ultra-rich. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the sprawling lobby. The interior was magnificent, lined with imported Italian marble and glowing with warm golden light. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. Several financial advisors in sharp, perfectly tailored suits walked briskly across the polished floor. I stood out entirely in this pristine environment. My clothes were deeply wrinkled and severely water-stained from the horrific blizzard. My hair was a completely tangled mess. I looked exactly like the desperate homeless woman my family had branded me to be. I slowly approached the main reception desk. A young teller with perfectly styled hair and a condescending smile looked up from her computer monitor. She scanned my disheveled appearance, her eyes dropping to my stained cardigan and scuffed shoes. Her polite smile instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of extreme annoyance. "Excuse me, miss," the teller said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I think you are in the wrong place. We do not have public restrooms here, and we certainly do not offer retail banking services. The subway station is 2 blocks down the street." I completely ignored her dismissive tone. I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany counter. "I am not here for the restroom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I have an account here, and I need to speak with the branch manager immediately." The young teller let out a very short, highly patronizing laugh. She tightly crossed her arms and leaned far back in her leather chair. "Right, a real account. Listen, miss, our minimum balance requirement for a primary portfolio is $10 million. I highly doubt you have any business with our executive team. Now I am going to have to ask you to leave before I call security to escort you out." I did not argue. I simply reached deep into my coat pocket and slowly pulled out the heavy matte black metal card. I dropped it onto the marble counter. The card landed with a solid, echoing thud. "Scan it," I demanded. The teller rolled her eyes, picking up the heavy metal card with a dramatic sigh. "Fine. Let us see what this is." She swiped the card through the secure reader attached to her terminal. For 2 seconds, absolutely nothing happened. The teller opened her mouth to deliver another insult, but the words died in her throat. Her large computer monitor suddenly flashed a brilliant pulsing crimson red. The screen locked out entirely, displaying a massive blinking notification. Code Red Executive VIP Alert. Override protocol initiated. Authorized personnel only. A low, incredibly rhythmic chime began to echo from the security desk across the lobby. The teller stared at her screen, all the color draining from her face. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with sudden absolute terror. "I am so sorry," she stammered frantically, pressing buttons on her keyboard. "Please wait right here, ma'am. Please do not move." Before I could even reply, a set of heavy frosted glass doors at the far back of the lobby swung open. A middle-aged man in a charcoal suit practically sprinted across the marble floor. He was sweating profusely, his face pale and stricken with panic. He nearly tripped over his own feet as he rushed toward the reception desk. He shoved the terrified teller aside and stared at the red flashing monitor. He turned to me, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Are you Stella?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Yes, I certainly am," I replied. The man hurriedly straightened his tie and swallowed hard. "My name is David. I am the senior branch manager for Sterling Heritage Trust. We have been waiting for that card to be activated for 5 years. Please accept my deepest apologies for the delay. Come with me immediately." David did not even wait for a response. He ushered me away from the front desk, bypassing the stares of the other employees. He quickly led me down a long, highly secure hallway, swiping his own biometric badge to open a reinforced steel door. We entered a completely soundproof glass-walled vault room, located deep inside the building. The room contained a massive conference table, several leather chairs, and a secure terminal. David locked the heavy door. He turned to face me with a serious expression. "Your grandfather Charles was our most valued client. When he passed away, the public narrative claimed he left his entire estate to your father Harrison. That was a meticulously crafted lie. Charles never left his fortune to Harrison. Instead, your grandfather placed his $150 million real estate and liquid asset portfolio into an irrevocable blind trust. Every single property and account your parents use belongs to this trust, and you, Stella, now own absolutely everything." I stood perfectly still right in the dead center of the soundproof vault, letting David's words settle into the frozen space between us. "Every single property and account your parents use belongs to this trust. And you, Stella, right now own absolutely everything." The sheer magnitude of his statement felt exactly like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I looked at the dark walnut table, my mind racing through the thousands of interactions I had endured with my family over the last 5 years. They had flaunted their wealth at every possible opportunity. They had belittled my apartment, mocked my career, and treated me like a pathetic charity case. Yet, according to the senior branch manager standing in front of me, they had been living on my dime the entire time. "Explain the mechanics to me," I demanded, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "I need to understand exactly how my father accessed these funds if he was not the actual owner." David quickly took the seat across from me. He opened a secure laptop embedded in the table and typed in a complex sequence of passwords. He turned the screen so I could see the cascading lines of financial data. "Your grandfather Charles was a mastermind of corporate structuring," David explained, pointing to a central document. "He established the Charles Irrevocable Trust a decade ago. He named you as the sole executor and the primary beneficiary. However, he knew that leaving a massive fortune to you directly at a young age would make you a prime target for your parents' greed. So he designed a highly specific conditional mechanism. I leaned forward, studying the intricate legal clauses displayed on the monitor. What kind of mechanism? David tapped the screen. He structured it as a blind trust with a designated maturation date. Your parents, Harrison and Cynthia, were granted limited, highly regulated allowances. The legal framework was drafted to make them believe they had inherited the bulk of the estate. But in reality, they were legally classified as mere caretakers. They were given a monthly stipend and permission to reside in the primary properties strictly under the condition that they were managing the assets until your 33rd birthday. Your grandfather knew you would need time to build your own career, develop your forensic accounting skills, and learn how to navigate the world without relying on unearned wealth. He also knew your parents would eventually show their true colors. I felt a cold, sharp realization snap into place. Yesterday was my 33rd birthday. That was the exact day my father chose to legally terminate the lease on my apartment and throw me out into a blinding blizzard. It was not a random act of cruelty. It was a calculated, desperate strike. They knew the trust was maturing. They knew their time was running out. They wanted to destabilize me, ruin my credit, and force me into a position where I would be too desperate to challenge them for control of the estate. David brought up a secondary dashboard highlighting a list of specific assets. Let us review the current holdings, he said, his tone purely professional. The Greenwich mansion where your parents currently reside is fully owned by the trust. The fleet of luxury vehicles they drive, including the imported sports car your sister Madison parades on social media, are leased through a subsidiary corporation that you now completely control. My eyes narrowed as I scanned the list. I spotted a familiar corporate entity name near the bottom of the ledger. Wait, I said, pointing at the screen. What about Jamal's trading firm? My brother-in-law claims to be a self-made financial genius. He brags about his venture capital funding constantly. David let out a heavy sigh, adjusting his glasses. Your brother-in-law did not secure outside venture capital. 2 years ago, your father utilized his caretaker status to authorize a massive withdrawal from the trust's secondary liquidity pool. He used your money to provide the initial seed capital for Jamal's trading firm. Your grandfather's wealth funded that entire operation. Every single computer monitor Jamal purchased, every square foot of office space he rented, and that custom-tailored suit he wears, it was all paid for by your inheritance. The sheer audacity of their betrayal hit me like a freight train. Jamal had thrown a crumpled $50 bill at my feet. He had told me to take a rideshare to a homeless shelter. He did all of this while standing on my property wearing clothes bought with my money and running a business funded by my grandfather. The rage that had been simmering inside me since Christmas Eve instantly turned into a glacier of pure calculating ice. I was not just going to take back my money, I was going to systematically dismantle their entire existence. What do we do now? I asked, leaning back in the leather chair. I want absolute control over every single penny. I want to see every transaction, every wire transfer, and every withdrawal they make. David reached into his briefcase and produced a thick stack of legal documents. He handed me a solid gold pen. You need to officially activate the executive override clause, he instructed. This was the final fail-safe your grandfather built into the trust. By signing these documents, you instantly revoke your parents' caretaker status. You will assume total, unmitigated control over the entire portfolio. More importantly, this clause grants you total surveillance over the trust's outgoing cash flow. You will be able to monitor their financial movements in real time without alerting them to the change in command. I grabbed the heavy gold pen and quickly signed my name on the dotted line of every single page. David collected the documents confirming the executive override was active. The laptop screen refreshed, granting me total visibility into all of their stolen finances. The hunt for them had officially begun. I did not freeze the accounts. Freezing the assets immediately would have alerted my father and Jamal that their access had been compromised. It would have given them time to destroy financial records, cover their tracks, or flee the jurisdiction. As a forensic accountant, my specialty was dissecting complex financial webs and building airtight criminal cases from the shadows. I needed to see exactly where my money was going before I snapped the trap shut. I rented an incredibly secure top-floor penthouse right in the very center of Manhattan, using the black card meticulously setting up a temporary, highly advanced command center. I immediately ordered 3 massive ultra-high-resolution monitors and personally connected them to a completely dedicated military-grade encrypted server to ensure absolute operational security. For the next 72 hours, I barely slept. I lived on black coffee and adrenaline, diving deep into the digital ledgers of the Charles Irrevocable Trust. The sheer volume of financial data was staggering. My grandfather had built a highly diversified portfolio of commercial real estate, municipal bonds, and liquid assets. But as I began mapping the cash flow from the past 2 years, a very specific and disturbing pattern emerged. I isolated the primary liquidity pool, the account my father had been granted limited access to for property maintenance and basic living expenses. The account showed dozens of massive, highly irregular wire transfers. These were not routine payments for landscaping or property taxes. These were massive outflows of capital, often exceeding $500,000 at a time. I traced the routing numbers attached to the wire transfers. They were not going to legitimate domestic vendors or established investment funds. The money was being aggressively funneled into a complex network of offshore shell companies. I spent an entire, exhausting night meticulously pulling obscure public registry data and continuously cross-referencing deeply buried corporate incorporation documents originating from the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas. The paper trail was incredibly convoluted, specifically designed to confuse normal auditors. However, I easily broke through the firewall. Every single one of those carefully hidden offshore shell companies pointed directly back to one single individual, Jamal. My brilliant self-proclaimed financial genius of a brother-in-law was systematically bleeding my grandfather's trust fund dry. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the glowing monitors in the dark penthouse. The scale of the embezzlement was breathtaking. My father was legally required to act as a fiduciary, meaning he was legally bound to protect the trust's assets. Instead, he had granted Jamal unchecked backdoor access to the primary accounts. They were wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the country every single month. But the offshore accounts were just the first layer of the deception. I needed to know exactly what Jamal was doing with the money once it left the United States. As I ran a sophisticated tracing algorithm to follow the offshore capital, my personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. It was the family group chat. I had muted the notifications months ago, but I kept the chat active strictly for observational purposes. I opened the messaging app and felt a fresh wave of revulsion wash over me. Madison had just uploaded a gallery of high-resolution photos. The location tag proudly displayed Aspen, Colorado. The first photo showed Madison and Jamal posing on the balcony of a massive ultra-luxury ski chalet. They were both wearing thousands of dollars worth of designer winter gear. Madison was holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne, smiling brightly at the camera. Jamal had his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, raising his own glass in a toast. The caption below the photo read, "Celebrating another record-breaking quarter for my amazing husband. Hard work pays off." Next stop, the private slopes. A string of enthusiastic replies immediately followed from my parents. My mother, Cynthia, sent a row of heart emojis. "You two look absolutely stunning," she typed. "Enjoy the snow, darlings. You have earned every bit of this luxury." My father chimed in right after her. "Proud of you, Jamal. Keep crushing those market projections. The family legacy is in excellent hands." I zoomed in on the photograph of Madison and Jamal. I looked at the imported champagne, the custom ski jackets, and the sprawling mountain chalet behind them. I cross-referenced the date of their trip with the banking data displayed on my monitors. I found the exact transaction immediately. 2 days ago, a wire transfer of $85,000 had been routed from my trust account to a luxury concierge service in Aspen. I was funding their glamorous lifestyle. Every drop of that vintage champagne, every night in that exclusive chalet, and every piece of designer clothing they wore was purchased with money they had stolen from me. They had thrown me out into a freezing blizzard on Christmas Eve with absolutely nothing. They had laughed in my face and told me I was a pathetic failure who needed to take a rideshare to a homeless shelter. And right at this exact moment, they were toasting to their success using my stolen inheritance. They truly believed they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded the only person in the family who could expose their lies. I set my phone face down on the heavy wooden desk. The deep anger I felt was no longer hot or chaotic. It was perfectly cold, exceptionally controlled, and entirely lethal. I turned my attention to the glowing monitors. The tracing algorithm had finished compiling the final destination of Jamal's offshore transfers. Data populated across the screen revealing the true nature of his supposed financial empire. He was not investing the money into the market. He was not generating record-breaking returns. The truth was far more sinister, and it gave me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them all. I pressed a single key to save all the encrypted files. I slowly opened a new window on my central monitor, pulling up the official corporate registration for Jamal's company, Apex Horizon Capital. On paper, it looked like a highly sophisticated investment firm catering to the elite of the financial world. He had a flashy website boasting proprietary algorithms, artificial intelligence-driven market predictions, and a roster of wealthy clients. But as I cross-referenced the incoming capital against his actual market trades, the facade crumbled immediately. Jamal was not a financial genius. He was barely even a day trader. The official brokerage accounts attached to his firm showed minimal activity. He was making sporadic amateurish trades that consistently lost money. The proprietary algorithm he constantly bragged about at family dinners did not exist. His entire operation was a complete mirage designed to blind greedy investors with the promise of impossible returns. I traced the money flowing into his firm from his wealthy clients. They were transferring millions of dollars into his control, believing he was multiplying their wealth. But none of that capital was entering the stock market. Jamal was funneling their investments directly into his own offshore shell companies to fund his lavish lifestyle. The real horror of his operation became clear when I analyzed how he kept his investors satisfied. A successful investment firm pays dividends based on actual market profits. Since Jamal was losing money on every legitimate trade he attempted, he had no real profits to distribute. To keep his wealthy clients from asking questions and demanding their principal investments back, he needed a constant, massive source of liquid cash. That was exactly where my grandfather's trust fund came into play. I watched the digital pathways illuminate across my screens. Jamal was executing a classic textbook Ponzi scheme, but with a highly sinister twist. Instead of solely relying on new investor money to pay off older investors, he was using my inheritance as his personal slush fund. Whenever an angry client demanded a return on their investment, Jamal would authorize a massive wire transfer from my trust account, route it through his Caribbean shell companies to wash the origin, and then deposit it into the client's account, disguised as trading profits. He was literally stealing my money to pay his fake dividends. He was keeping the entire fraudulent house of cards from collapsing by bleeding my legacy dry. I initially assumed my sister was just a foolish, shallow victim in all of this. I thought Madison was simply enjoying the spoils of her husband's supposed success without understanding the mechanics of his business. I was completely wrong about her. Madison was entirely complicit in this massive fraud. I opened her highly curated social media profiles on my secondary monitor. She had millions of followers who believed she was a wildly successful lifestyle influencer, landing massive brand deals with luxury fashion houses and high-end cosmetics companies. I hacked into the financial records of her personal limited liability company. The truth was absolutely pathetic. No luxury brands were actually paying her. Her engagement metrics were artificially inflated using purchased bot farms. The massive sponsorship checks she claimed to be receiving were actually direct deposits from Jamal's offshore accounts. They were laundering the stolen trust money directly through her fake influencer business. Madison knew they were hemorrhaging cash every single day. She knew Jamal was not making real money. She willingly participated in the money laundering operation to maintain her fake billionaire persona online. She was actively helping him steal from our family estate just so she could post pictures of designer handbags and private jet flights. The glamorous life she constantly used to mock my corporate job was entirely funded by my stolen inheritance. As I dug deeper into the corporate structure of Apex Horizon Capital, I found the darkest secret of all. Running a Ponzi scheme of this magnitude required a massive amount of initial leverage. Jamal had taken out tens of millions of dollars in high-interest corporate loans to secure premium office space hire staff, to maintain the illusion, and host extravagant networking galas to lure in new victims. But Jamal had terrible credit before marrying my sister. No legitimate banking institution would have approved those massive loans without an incredibly secure guarantor. I pulled up the digitized loan agreements from the lending institutions. My blood ran cold as I scanned the signature pages. Jamal had not secured the loans himself. He had explicitly listed my father Harrison as the primary guarantor for every single fraudulent loan. He had used my father's reputation, his social standing in Greenwich, and his perceived ownership of my grandfather's estate as the ultimate collateral. I zoomed in on the signatures. Some appeared to be digitally manipulated, but others were completely genuine. My father had willingly signed documents pledging assets he did not actually own to back a fraudulent company. Jamal had masterfully set up his own father-in-law. When the Ponzi scheme inevitably collapsed when the wealthy investors realized their money was gone and the authorities came knocking, Jamal had a perfect exit strategy. The legal liability would fall entirely on Harrison. My father had kicked me out into a freezing blizzard to protect a man who was actively framing him for federal financial crimes. They had all betrayed me, but they were also secretly destroying each other. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the undeniable proof of their impending ruin. I carefully reviewed the entire digital dossier one last time to ensure nothing was missed. Every single legal document I downloaded was impeccably organized in folders. Every single illicit transaction was perfectly highlighted and thoroughly tracked. I had all the offshore routing numbers, the fake dividend payouts, the laundered influencer money, and the fraudulent loan guarantees. I smiled coldly at the glowing screens. The trap was fully set and primed. Now I just needed to patiently wait for the absolute perfect moment to spring it and watch their fake world burn to ashes entirely. I smiled coldly at the glowing screens. The trap was fully set and primed. Now I just needed to patiently wait for the absolute perfect moment to spring it and watch their fake world burn to ashes entirely. But my forensic instincts urged me to look just a little deeper. I had mapped out Jamal and his fraudulent trading firm. I had completely exposed my sister and her fake influencer money laundering operation. However, the financial puzzle still had one glaring missing piece. If my father was the primary guarantor for Jamal and his massive corporate loans, how was he funding his own extravagant lifestyle? Harrison had always projected the image of a highly successful patriarch. He paid exorbitant monthly dues at the most exclusive country clubs in Connecticut. He hosted lavish dinner parties. He wore custom suits and drove imported cars. Yet as I pulled up his personal banking ledgers, the reality of his situation was shockingly pathetic. Harrison was completely broke. His personal checking accounts were dangerously close to being overdrawn. He had completely maxed out every single high-limit credit card in his name. His supposed wealth was nothing but smoke and mirrors, held together by mounting debt and desperate financial juggling. I scanned his transaction history from the past 6 months, searching for the exact mechanism he used to keep his head above water. Suddenly, a massive, glaring deposit caught my eye. Just 3 months ago, a private lending institution had wired exactly $4 million directly into my father and his primary account. I immediately ran a trace on the transaction identifier. The transfer was not a business loan or a liquid asset liquidation. It was a massive home equity payout. My father had successfully applied for and received a $4 million second mortgage on the Greenwich estate. I sat forward in my chair, staring at the screen in absolute disbelief. You cannot mortgage a property you do not legally own. As the senior branch manager had clearly explained to me, the Greenwich mansion was entirely owned by my grandfather and his blind trust. Harrison was merely a designated caretaker with absolutely no legal right to leverage the property. I quickly bypassed the lending institution and its security firewall to retrieve the original mortgage application. The documents loaded onto my screen, and the sheer audacity of his crime was breathtaking. My father had deliberately submitted completely fabricated property deeds. He had forged official trust documents to falsely present himself to the private lender as the sole undisputed owner of the Greenwich estate. He had committed textbook undeniable federal mortgage fraud. This was a severe felony that carried a mandatory federal prison sentence. He had signed his own death warrant just to keep up appearances at the country club. But the timeline still bothered me. If my father had secured $4 million just 3 months ago, why were they so incredibly desperate for cash right now? Why did they go to such extreme lengths to throw me out of my apartment on Christmas Eve? The violence of that night had always felt unhinged even for them. My father claiming he needed the space for Jamal and his trading floor monitors was a convenient excuse, but liars always use anger to mask panic. I cross-referenced the date of my eviction with Jamal and his corporate trading accounts. The answer appeared on my monitor like a flashing beacon. On the morning of December 24th, the exact same day I was kicked out into the blizzard, Jamal and his firm were hit with a massive catastrophic margin call. A group of wealthy aggressive investors had suddenly demanded the immediate withdrawal of their capital. Jamal did not have the cash to pay them. The offshore accounts were temporarily frozen due to a holiday banking delay. If Jamal failed to meet that margin call by the end of the day, his entire firm would be subjected to an automatic regulatory audit. The authorities would step in, inspect his ledgers, and instantly uncover the multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. They were backed into a corner and facing immediate federal prison time. I pulled up the legal documentation regarding my apartment lease. My father had constantly reminded me that he was the primary legal signer. I paid the rent, but his name controlled the contract. What he never mentioned was that my apartment was a highly coveted luxury unit in a tightly controlled market. It held a massive security deposit and a lucrative buyout clause. I hacked into the property management database to see exactly what Harrison had done on Christmas Eve. He did not just terminate my lease to give the space to Jamal. That was a pathetic lie. He had ruthlessly sold the highly sought-after lease rights to a wealthy foreign buyer who was desperate for immediate residency. By legally evicting me, my father instantly triggered a massive cash buyout from the building management and reclaimed the entire bloated security deposit. He secured hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of hours. The money was wired straight into Jamal and his failing firm to satisfy the angry investors and stop the regulatory audit. They literally sold my safety for a temporary financial bandage. They threw their own flesh and blood into a freezing winter storm simply to keep their fraudulent empire breathing for one more month. I sat alone in my secure penthouse, feeling the last remaining shreds of familial loyalty evaporate from my soul. Every decision they made was driven by pure malice and greed. They robbed my grandfather, defrauded financial institutions, and sacrificed my well-being to protect Jamal. The pain of their rejection was entirely gone now, completely replaced by the cold, mechanical precision of a forensic executioner. I meticulously compiled every forged signature, every illegal transfer, and every piece of fraudulent leverage into a single undeniable federal dossier. I saved all evidence to my encrypted server, ensuring nothing could be deleted. With the digital vault secured, I began organizing the irrefutable dossier. I needed to ensure that when the hammer finally fell, not a single one of them could wriggle out on a technicality. I pulled the IP logs from the banking mainframe. The data showed that every wire transfer sent to the Cayman Islands originated from the exact IP address assigned to Jamal and his heavily monitored trading floor. He had practically gift-wrapped his own digital fingerprints. Next, I pulled the high-resolution scans of the mortgage documents my father had submitted. I placed Harrison and his forged signatures side by side with a verified copy of Grandfather Charles and his actual handwriting. The forgery was laughably amateurish. Harrison had copied the loop of the letter C, but entirely missed the aggressive slant Charles always used. I packaged the IP logs, offshore wire receipts, fake dividend payouts, and forged mortgage application into a master file. I backed up the entire federal dossier onto 3 separate encrypted flash drives. The evidence was absolutely bulletproof, but presenting it to the authorities right now would just lead to a quiet arrest. A quiet arrest was far too merciful for what they had done to me. I wanted a spectacle. I wanted them to feel the exact same public humiliation they had subjected me to my entire life. I picked up my secure phone and called David at the Sterling Heritage Trust. I told him I needed to set a very specific trap. I instructed him to draft a formal letter from the bank addressed directly to Harrison. It needed to look like a standard automated request from the compliance department. David agreed immediately. We crafted the language to sound perfectly bureaucratic. The letter stated that the primary liquidity pool associated with the Charles Irrevocable Trust had been flagged by an automated system for a routine financial audit. The notice formally demanded that Harrison provide a comprehensive accounting of the last 24 months of withdrawals. It set a firm deadline of January 2nd. We mentioned the exact offshore routing numbers Jamal had been using, framing it as a simple clerical verification. It was the perfect bait. It was terrifying enough to make them panic, but vague enough to make them believe they could still lie their way out of it if they just moved fast enough. David printed the notice on the thickest, most intimidating watermarked bank stationery available. He sent it to the Greenwich estate via priority overnight courier. I sat back in the leather chair of my penthouse, keeping my eyes glued to the family group chat on my secondary monitor. I knew exactly what time the courier was scheduled to arrive. At precisely 10 in the morning, the notification chime on my phone shattered the silence of the room. The trap had officially snapped shut. Harrison sent the first message. He uploaded a blurry, frantic photograph of the bank notice. The text below it read in all capital letters, "Jamal, call me right now. We have a massive problem. The bank is asking for the Cayman transfer records." "I thought you said those were untraceable," Jamal replied 3 minutes later. His message was typed in a rush, lacking his usual arrogant punctuation. "Calm down, Harrison. Do not put anything else in writing. It is just a routine system glitch. I will handle it." Madison quickly joined the chaotic digital thread. "What is going on? My credit card just declined at the boutique." "Jamal, did you forget to transfer the allowance again?" Cynthia immediately followed. "Harrison, why is the bank asking about the liquidity pool? You promised me everything was secure." The sheer panic radiating from the screen was deeply satisfying to watch. They were scrambling like rats on a sinking ship. Harrison sent another rapid-fire message to the group. "Jamal, the notice specifically names the offshore accounts. If they run a full audit on the estate, they will see the second mortgage. They will see the missing seed capital. We are going to lose the house." Jamal tried to regain control of the narrative. "I said I will handle it, Harrison. The bank does not know anything yet. It is just an automated compliance check. They do this at the end of the fiscal year. We just need to show them a temporary influx of capital to balance the ledger before the deadline. We need to raise more liquidity right now to cover the gap." Madison typed back, her panic matching our father. "How are we supposed to raise that much cash by January 2nd? We spent the buyout money from Stella and her apartment on the last margin call. We are completely tapped out." I read that specific message over and over again. Hearing Madison casually admit that my eviction was nothing but a quick cash grab cemented my total lack of empathy. Jamal replied to his frantic wife with his signature brand of delusion. "We throw a party, a massive high-ticket investment gala for New Year's Eve. I will pitch the new algorithm to my top-tier clients. If I can secure $5 million in fresh capital by midnight, I can route it back into the trust account and balance the books before the bank opens on the 2nd. It will satisfy the automated audit and we will be completely in the clear. Harrison agreed immediately. Yes, a gala. We will host it at the downtown hotel. We have to make it look incredibly exclusive. Cynthia, start making the guest list. We need every wealthy investor in Connecticut in that room. The audacity of their plan was truly staggering. Instead of stopping, they were doubling down. They were about to invite the richest people in the state into a room and beg them to fund a failing criminal enterprise. They honestly believed they were outsmarting the system. They had absolutely no idea that I was the one pulling the strings, dictating their every single move. The preparations for the New Year's Eve charity gala began with a sickening level of extravagance. Through my surveillance access, I watched the digital paper trail as my father and Jamal scrambled to pull off the biggest con of their lives. They had less than a week to orchestrate a high society event that would normally take months of meticulous planning. They booked the grand ballroom at the most expensive and prestigious hotel in downtown Greenwich. They hired a Michelin-starred catering team, ordered thousands of imported white roses, and secured a live orchestral band to provide the perfect ambiance of old money legitimacy. Because their personal accounts were utterly depleted, Harrison actually had the audacity to charge the massive event deposits directly to a corporate credit card tied to my grandfather's trust. They were using my stolen money to fund the very party designed to cover up their theft. The invitations were sent out via expedited courier to the wealthiest elite in Connecticut. They targeted vulnerable high-net-worth individuals, mostly wealthy retirees, widowed socialites, and aggressive venture capitalists hungry for the next big score. To ensure a massive turnout, Cynthia marketed the entire evening as an exclusive charity event benefiting underprivileged youth in the technology sector. It was an absolutely brilliant, deeply evil psychological tactic. People are always far more willing to open their checkbooks when they believe they are doing a good deed while simultaneously getting rich. But the charity was just a phantom front. The real objective was the silent auction and the subsequent private presentation Jamal had scheduled for the stroke of midnight. I intercepted the digital presentation deck Jamal planned to project during the gala. It was a masterpiece of financial fiction. He had fabricated charts showing completely impossible upward market trajectories. He invented complex mathematical jargon to describe his supposedly revolutionary artificial intelligence trading algorithm. The pitch was incredibly aggressive. He was offering a limited-time opportunity for the gala attendees to invest in a brand-new ultra-exclusive tech fund. He promised guaranteed quarterly returns of 20%. Any seasoned forensic accountant would spot the fraud instantly, but to a room full of eager champagne-drunk socialites trusting my father's pristine reputation, it would look like the opportunity of a lifetime. Jamal's actual plan was sickeningly simple. The moment those wealthy investors wired their millions into his new phantom tech fund, he would illegally divert the capital. He planned to immediately transfer $5 million straight into the Charles Irrevocable Trust's primary liquidity pool. By depositing that stolen investor money into the trust account before the January 2nd deadline, the ledger would temporarily look perfectly balanced. The automated compliance audit would be satisfied, the bank would drop the inquiry, and Jamal and Harrison would avoid federal prison. They were simply building a brand new Ponzi scheme to bail out the original Ponzi scheme, destroying dozens of new lives just to save their own pathetic skins. While they frantically constructed their criminal masterpiece, they still found the time to direct their cruelty toward me. I was sitting at my command center desk reviewing the fake charts Jamal had designed when my phone screen lit up. It was a direct text message from my sister. Madison had not spoken to me since the night she watched me walk into the blizzard. I opened the message. It was a photograph of Madison standing in the hotel ballroom pointing at a large stack of glossy VIP guest lanyards. The text below the image read exactly as I expected. Hope you are enjoying the cheap motel. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Do not even bother trying to show up to our New Year's Eve gala to beg for a job or a handout. We gave a printed photograph of your face to the head of security. If you step within 50 feet of the red carpet, they have strict orders to physically throw you out into the street where you belong. Happy New Year, loser. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. The message was meant to crush my spirit. Madison wanted me to feel isolated, helpless, and completely excluded from their glittering world. She wanted to remind me that she was the glamorous golden child hosting the social event of the season, while I was the discarded trash rotting in a roadside motel. Instead of feeling hurt, I felt a deep, resonant surge of pure satisfaction. The sheer arrogance of her message was the final confirmation I needed. They were so blinded by their own narcissism that they could not see the massive guillotine swinging down directly toward their necks. They thought they had successfully locked me out of the building. They had absolutely no idea that I actually owned the building, the security team, and the very ground they were standing on. I did not reply to Madison's hateful message. Silence was a far sharper weapon. I let her continue believing she held all the power. Let her enjoy her champagne and her stolen designer dresses for a few more days. Let Harrison shake hands with his wealthy friends and pretend he was a titan of industry. Let Jamal stand on that stage and sell his fraudulent dreams to the highest bidders. I wanted them to climb as high as they possibly could. I wanted them to reach the absolute peak of their arrogance and feel completely invincible. Because the higher they climbed, the more devastating the impact would be when I finally shattered their glass floor. I turned my attention away from the phone and back to my secure, encrypted server. The trap they were setting for their new investors was the exact mechanism I needed to seal their fate forever. It was time to stop watching from the shadows and prepare for the main event. I reached for the phone and dialed the direct contact number for the federal authorities. I was finally ready to burn their empire. I left my secure penthouse and took a private car directly to the federal building in Lower Manhattan. I was not walking in blind. During my career as a senior forensic accountant, I had cultivated highly valuable relationships with top investigators. I bypassed the standard public reception area and rode the restricted elevator straight up to the white-collar crime division. Waiting for me in a secure, windowless briefing room were two highly seasoned operatives, Agent Mitchell from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Agent Ramirez from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I placed the 3 encrypted flash drives directly onto the steel table. I did not waste a single second on pleasantries. I projected the master file onto the screen and began walking them through the financial slaughterhouse my family had built. I showed them the forged mortgage application first. Agent Mitchell leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the blatant discrepancies in my father's fabricated signatures. I quickly followed up with the banking logs demonstrating exactly how Harrison leveraged the fake property deeds to secure a $4 million payout from a private lending institution. That alone constituted federal mortgage fraud, but it was merely the opening act. I pulled up the routing numbers associated with Jamal and his supposed venture capital firm. I showed Agent Ramirez how the initial seed money was illegally drained from my grandfather's blind trust. Then I displayed the irrefutable proof of the offshore wire transfers. I tracked the stolen funds moving from Connecticut to the Cayman Islands and back into the personal accounts of wealthy investors. I showed them the fake dividend payouts and the artificial inflation of Madison and her fraudulent lifestyle brand. Agent Ramirez let out a low whistle, crossing his arms as he stared at the staggering flow of illicit cash. "This is a highly sophisticated multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme," he stated, his voice laced with professional disbelief. "They are washing stolen inheritance money through international channels to pay off their early investors. The wire fraud alone carries a 20-year federal sentence per count." Agent Mitchell immediately stood up and grabbed the secure phone on the conference table. Because the fraud involved federal banking systems, interstate commerce, and international wire transfers, the authorities had absolute jurisdiction. Within 10 minutes, he had secured authorization from his superiors to open a massive covert joint task force. The wheels of the federal justice system began turning with terrifying speed. However, I knew we needed one final undeniable piece of evidence to ensure Jamal could never negotiate a plea deal. We needed to catch him in the absolute act of soliciting new funds to keep his criminal enterprise alive. I pulled up the digital invitation for the New Year's Eve charity gala. I explained their desperate plan to the federal agents. Jamal intends to stand on a stage tomorrow night and pitch his fake artificial intelligence trading algorithm to a room full of the wealthiest retirees and investors in Connecticut. He needs to raise $5 million before midnight to satisfy the automated audit notice I intentionally triggered. Agent Mitchell studied the gala itinerary. If we arrest them right now, Jamal will claim the offshore accounts were just a bad business decision. He will blame market volatility and try to shield himself behind corporate bankruptcy protections. But if we let him take that stage, if we let him actively solicit millions of dollars from live investors under false pretenses, it instantly becomes a slam-dunk racketeering case. Agent Ramirez completely agreed. We hold off on the arrests, he decided. We let them throw their extravagant party. We allow Jamal to present his fraudulent charts to the crowd. The moment he publicly asks for their capital and attempts to execute a wire transfer, we move in and seize everything. The strategy was perfectly aligned with my ultimate goal. I wanted them to experience the sheer crushing weight of public humiliation. We spent the next 6 hours meticulously planning the logistical execution of the sting operation. The Joint Task Force quickly mobilized a team of undercover operatives. Several highly trained agents would infiltrate the gala, posing as wealthy, aggressive venture capitalists, eager to invest in Jamal and his new tech fund. They would wear concealed recording devices to capture every single lie Jamal uttered during his midnight presentation. Meanwhile, tactical units from both federal agencies would quietly secure the entire perimeter of the hotel. They would lock down the loading docks, the underground parking garage, and all the employee exits to ensure my father and Jamal had absolutely no path of escape. We integrated the hotel security framework into our operation. Because my grandfather's trust was ultimately paying for the venue rental, the hotel management was legally obligated to comply entirely with my directives. I had the general manager quietly reassign the standard event bouncers and replace them with undercover federal agents dressed in formal black tie attire. As the briefing concluded, Agent Mitchell looked at me with a profound sense of respect. "I have worked in financial crimes for 15 years, he said, packing the encrypted drives into an evidence lockbox. I have never seen a victim dismantle an operation with such cold, calculated precision. You handed us a fully prosecuted case tied up with a neat little bow." "I am not a victim," I replied, staring at the projected image of my family smiling in Aspen. "I am the executor of the Charles Irrevocable Trust, and I am simply taking out the garbage." I walked out of the federal building as the sun began to set over the frozen city. The icy wind howled through the concrete canyons, but I did not feel the cold anymore. My parents thought they had silenced me. Jamal thought he was untouchable. They were blissfully preparing to host the social event of the season, completely unaware that the guest list now included the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The final curtain was falling. New Year's Eve descended upon Greenwich with a bitter, freezing wind, but inside the grand ballroom of the downtown hotel, the atmosphere was suffocatingly warm and dripping with stolen opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant golden glow over the sprawling room. The space was absolutely packed with the most powerful elite in Connecticut. Wealthy investors, prominent local politicians, and aging socialites, draped in diamonds, mingled around towering ice sculptures and tables, overflowing with imported caviar. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided flawlessly through the massive crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne. Every single detail of the extravagant decor was designed to project an aura of absolute financial invincibility. It was the perfect glittering facade for a crumbling criminal empire. I stepped out of the Blacktown car and placed my heels onto the red carpet leading up to the main entrance. I was no longer the freezing, discarded woman shivering in a damp cardigan on a snowy porch. I wore a breathtaking, custom-tailored emerald green designer suit that fit with razor-sharp precision. The silk fabric caught the flash of the venue lights, radiating pure authority and control. My hair was styled perfectly, and my expression was completely unreadable. Flanking me on either side were two top-tier corporate litigators from my grandfather's primary legal team. They wore immaculate dark suits and carried heavy leather briefcases containing the exact legal instruments needed to execute my total takeover of the estate. We bypassed the crowded valet station and walked directly toward the massive double doors of the main lobby. The undercover federal agents I had coordinated with earlier were already in position. I spotted Agent Mitchell standing discreetly near the coat check, wearing a tuxedo and an earpiece completely hidden by his collar. He gave me a single imperceptible nod. The perimeter was entirely secure. Jamal and Harrison had no escape routes left. We entered the grand foyer, just as the string quartet began playing a lively classical piece inside the main ballroom. The sheer volume of wealth packed into the adjacent room was staggering. I stood at the threshold, taking in the glittering crowd. My father was holding court near the center ice sculpture, laughing loudly, with a group of aggressive venture capitalists. He looked incredibly smug, swirling his expensive bourbon and playing the role of the undisputed titan of industry. Across the room, Jamal was working the crowd with terrifying efficiency. He was shaking hands, patting shoulders, and whispering promises of guaranteed returns into the ears of wealthy widows and eager politicians. They were actively reeling in their next batch of victims. Then my eyes found my younger sister. Madison was standing near the grand staircase, wearing a shimmering, heavily beaded gown that plunged dramatically at the neckline. She was posing for a photographer, flashing her brilliant practiced smile while holding a glass of champagne. She was actively performing her fake billionaire lifestyle brand for her social media followers. She lowered her glass to check her phone, and as she turned, her gaze swept across the entrance. Her eyes locked directly onto mine. The practiced glowing smile vanished from Madison's face in less than a second. Her jaw actually dropped as she took in my appearance. She stared at the custom-tailored emerald suit, the impeccable styling, and the two intimidating corporate litigators standing guard on either side of me. Her shock quickly morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. The very sight of me standing tall and exuding absolute power fundamentally broke her brain. I was supposed to be destroyed. I was supposed to be freezing hungry and begging for scraps at a cheap roadside motel. Seeing me project total dominance shattered the fragile reality she had built. Madison slammed her champagne glass onto a passing waiter's tray, spilling half the expensive liquid onto the marble floor. She marched straight across the foyer toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished stone. Her face twisted into a mask of ugly, vindictive fury. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, completely ignoring the two powerful lawyers standing right beside me. "Security!" Madison shrieked, her shrill voice cutting through the elegant classical music echoing from the ballroom. "I told you to keep the trash out." Several guests turned their heads, alarmed by the sudden outburst. Madison did not care about the audience. She stepped within inches of my face, her breath smelling strongly of alcohol. "What do you think you are doing here, Stella?" Madison hissed, her eyes wild with anger. "Did you honestly think you could just put on a fake designer suit and crash my gala? You are a pathetic loser. You have absolutely zero money and zero connections. I gave the head of security a clear photograph of your face. You are supposed to be banned from this property. I am going to have you physically dragged out into the street." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at my sister with a level of cold detachment that made her pause. She expected me to cower. She expected the scared, compliant older sister who always took the abuse to keep the peace. I simply adjusted the cuff of my emerald jacket and offered a small, terrifyingly calm smile. "You are making a massive scene, Madison," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying enough authority to make her blink. "These people are looking at you. You are ruining your own carefully curated aesthetic. I do not care who is looking." Madison snapped, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "Security, Get over here right now and remove this pathetic woman. She is trespassing on a private exclusive event. I will not ask you again. Madison continued, her voice rising to a near hysterical pitch as two large men in dark suits immediately stepped forward. Throw her out into the freezing snow right now. The guards did not move a single inch toward me. Madison spun around to face them, her heavy beaded gown swishing aggressively against the marble tiles. She glared at the two imposing men in dark suits, her face turning an even deeper shade of crimson. I gave you a direct order, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the grand foyer. Grab her by the arms and throw her out immediately. The head of security, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe expression, simply crossed his hands in front of him and stared blankly over her head. He completely ignored her frantic demands. The commotion had finally drawn the attention of my parents. Harrison and Cynthia rushed out from the main ballroom, pushing their way through the gathering crowd of curious onlookers. Cynthia gripped her diamond necklace, her eyes scanning the scene before locking onto me. She let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Are you here to beg for a job, you ugly dropout? Cynthia sneered, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. Did you finally run out of cash at that cheap motel? Harrison stepped in front of my mother, puffing out his chest to project the false authority he had relied on his entire life. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my face. You have a lot of nerve showing your face here tonight, Stella, he growled. This is a highly exclusive charity gala. We are hosting the most important investors in the state. You are deliberately trying to humiliate us, but it will not work. He turned his attention to the head of security, adopting his most commanding, authoritative tone. I am the host of this event. I demand that you remove this woman from the premises right this second. If you do not comply, I will personally ensure you and your entire staff are fired before midnight. The head of security did not flinch. He did not reach for his radio. He simply looked at Harrison with a mixture of pity and professional indifference. The silence in the lobby stretched into a tense, agonizing void. Harrison's face turned purple with rage as he realized his commands were entirely ineffective. My two corporate litigators smoothly stepped forward from my side. The taller lawyer opened his heavy leather briefcase with a crisp snapping sound that cut through the tension. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. He handed the primary document directly to the head of security. This is a binding federal injunction and a direct declaration of ownership, the lawyer stated clearly, ensuring his voice carried across the foyer. The head of security took the document, adjusted his earpiece, and quickly scanned the signature on the final page. He gave my lawyer a curt, respectful nod. He then turned to his men and raised his hand, signaling them to stand completely down. They stepped back, clearing a wide path for me. Harrison stared at the guards in absolute bewilderment. "What are you doing?" he shouted, spit flying from his lips. "I paid for this venue. I signed your checks. You work for me." I stepped forward, closing the distance between my father and myself. I looked him dead in the eyes, my expression utterly devoid of any mercy or hesitation. "You do not employ security tonight, Harrison," I stated calmly. "The Charles Trust does, and as the sole executor, I am their boss. Step aside." The color drained from my father's face so fast he looked physically ill. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of a lavish floral arrangement. Cynthia gasped, grabbing his arm to steady him. Her previously arrogant sneer dissolved into an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "What did you just say?" Cynthia stammered, her voice shaking violently. "What do you mean you are the executor? That is impossible. Harrison controls the trust. We control the estate. You are just a dropout. You have nothing. You are absolutely nothing." I smoothed the lapel of my custom emerald green suit. "I have everything," I corrected her. "The lease for this ballroom, the catering contract, the flowers and the security detail were all paid for using a corporate credit card tied directly to the primary liquidity pool of the Charles Irrevocable Trust. Since I activated the executive override clause yesterday morning, I legally assumed total control over every single penny. I own the venue tonight. You are merely guests at my party, And right now, you are standing in my way." Madison let out a loud, dramatic wail. She clutched her head, her carefully styled hair becoming disheveled. "You cannot do this to us," she cried, stomping her expensive heels on the floor. "Jamal needs this gala to secure his new tech fund. We need this money. You are ruining my life." I turned my piercing gaze toward my younger sister. "The dress you are wearing was purchased with funds stolen from my inheritance," I said, my voice sharp and cutting. "Your entire life is a complete illusion built on stolen cash and fake brand deals. The charade ends tonight." Harrison finally found his voice again, though it trembled with barely contained panic. "You are bluffing," he hissed, trying to reclaim a fraction of his shattered dignity. "You hacked into our accounts. This is cyber terrorism. I am calling the police right now. I will have you arrested for fraud and trespassing." He frantically reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out his cell phone, his fingers slipping on the screen. I smiled at my father's empty threat. "Please call them," I encouraged, taking a step forward. "Call the authorities and tell them exactly what you have done with the offshore wire transfers and the forged property deeds. I am sure they would love to hear your confession." I slowly brushed past my petrified family and walked straight into the dazzling ballroom. It was time to burn their fraudulent empire to the absolute ground. I left my parents standing frozen in the grand foyer and stepped into the dazzling main ballroom. The sheer scale of the deception was magnificent. Hundreds of the wealthiest individuals in Connecticut were gathered beneath towering crystal chandeliers, clinking their champagne flutes and murmuring excitedly about the exclusive investment opportunity of the decade. Waiters navigated through the sea of designer gowns and custom tuxedos, offering silver trays loaded with hors d'oeuvres. The air hummed with the electric energy of extreme wealth and unbridled greed. I moved through the dense crowd like a phantom in my emerald green suit, my two corporate litigators trailing silently right behind me. Nobody paid any attention to me. All eyes were completely fixed on the raised stage at the far end of the room. Jamal was standing in the very center of the platform, bathed in a warm, focused spotlight. He looked incredibly polished, wearing his expensive bespoke suit and projecting absolute confidence. Behind him, three massive projector screens displayed sleek, looping animations of rising stock graphs and complex streams of digital data. He paced the stage with the practiced rhythm of a megachurch pastor holding a wireless microphone and capturing the undivided attention of every single person in the room. "We are standing on the precipice of a financial revolution," Jamal announced, his smooth baritone voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. For decades, the global markets have been controlled by the traditional gatekeepers. Wall Street has hoarded the wealth using outdated models and archaic systems to dictate who wins and who loses. But at Apex Horizon Capital, we have shattered those old paradigms entirely. We do not rely on human intuition or outdated metrics. We rely on the future. He paused for dramatic effect, sweeping his gaze across the captivated audience. He raised his free hand toward the enormous digital screens behind him. "Our proprietary artificial intelligence trading algorithm is the most advanced predictive software ever created." Jamal continued, his tone swelling with manufactured passion. "It processes millions of global data points per second. It anticipates market fluctuations before they even occur. It completely eliminates human error and emotional trading. Because of this unparalleled technology, we are able to offer our select partners guaranteed quarterly returns of 20%. The crowd let out an audible murmur of awe. I saw prominent local politicians nodding in agreement, and wealthy retirees leaning forward in their seats, their eyes practically shining with dollar signs. They were entirely mesmerized by the sheer magnitude of his promises. They were practically lining up to hand over their life savings. Jamal offered a humble, charming smile. "Tonight we are opening our doors to a select group of visionary investors," he declared. "We are offering you the rare chance to bypass the old system and join a brand new era of limitless financial growth." But this specific funding round closes exactly at midnight. Once the clock strikes 12, the window of opportunity shuts completely. I continued walking deliberately along the far right wall of the massive ballroom, keeping to the shadows cast by the heavy velvet drapes. I observed the undercover federal agents seamlessly blending into the crowd. They were dressed impeccably, holding champagne flutes, pretending to hang on to every single word of Jamal and his fraudulent pitch. They were waiting for the exact moment he directly solicited the illegal funds. My target was not the stage just yet. My immediate destination was the elevated audio-visual control booth located at the back corner of the room. The booth was elevated on a raised platform, heavily shielded by tinted glass, and operated by a team of professional technicians hired by the hotel venue. I climbed the short flight of carpeted stairs and pushed open the door to the booth. The lead technician, a young man wearing heavy headphones, turned around with a sharp glare, ready to kick me out of his restricted workspace. I did not give him the chance to speak. I simply gestured to the senior corporate litigator standing right beside me. My lawyer swiftly produced a legally binding document and handed it directly to the technician. The venue management has been fully apprised of the ownership transfer, my lawyer stated with absolute authority. This entire event is funded by the Charles Irrevocable Trust. The executor of that trust is standing right here. You take your directives solely from her effective immediately. The technician read the document, his eyes widening as he recognized the signature of the hotel general manager authorizing the takeover. He immediately pulled off his headphones and nodded at me, stepping back from the massive digital control console. Give me full access to the primary display feeds, I commanded, and cut the microphone on the stage right now. The technician did exactly as he was instructed. He flipped a series of heavy switches on the soundboard. Down on the stage, Jamal was right in the middle of his grand sweeping conclusion. The future of wealth is not inherited, it is engineered, Jamal declared, raising his hands toward the ceiling. And tonight together we are going to engineer a legacy that will last. For his smooth, booming voice suddenly cut out completely. The powerful sound system went entirely dead. Jamal tapped the side of his microphone, his confident smile faltering for a fraction of a second as he realized the audio equipment was completely unresponsive. A confused murmur rippled through the massive crowd of wealthy investors. They exchanged uncertain glances, wondering if this technical malfunction was a planned part of the presentation. I leaned over the complex control board and quickly plugged my encrypted flash drive directly into the primary video server. I bypassed his sleek looping animations of rising stock graphs. The three massive projector screens behind Jamal instantly flickered to pitch black. A collective gasp echoed across the grand ballroom. Then the screens flashed back to life, projecting the stark, highly classified financial documents I had compiled. The trap was sprung. I left the audio-visual control booth and descended the short flight of stairs, stepping back onto the plush carpet of the main ballroom. The three massive 30-foot projector screens dominating the stage were now brightly illuminating the entire room with stark white backgrounds and dense black text. The complex, colorful graphs Jamal had used to mesmerize the crowd were completely gone. In their place were the highly classified, unredacted legal documents of the Charles Irrevocable Trust. The bold, undeniable heading of the primary document was displayed for every single wealthy investor to see. My grandfather's name and my own name as the sole executor were highlighted in bright yellow. A heavy wave of confusion washed over the hundreds of attendees. Whispers broke out among the socialites and politicians. They squinted at the massive screens, trying to comprehend the dense legal jargon suddenly replacing the slick financial pitch. Jamal stood frozen in the center of the stage. He turned his head slowly, looking up at the towering screens behind him. His eyes scanned the legal documents, and I could see the exact moment his brain processed the catastrophic reality of what he was reading. I walked straight down the center aisle, moving with absolute purpose and unwavering authority. The crowd parted naturally, sensing the sheer intensity radiating from me. My emerald green designer suit caught the ambient light, standing in stark contrast to the sea of traditional black tuxedos and dark evening gowns. My two corporate litigators followed closely, carrying their briefcases, and maintaining a formidable presence. I reached the edge of the elevated platform and climbed the short set of wooden stairs leading directly onto the stage. Jamal was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his expensive bespoke jacket. He took a stumbling step backward as I approached the main acrylic podium. He clutched his dead wireless microphone, looking wildly toward the back of the room for my father. Harrison and Cynthia were pushing through the crowd near the rear doors, but they were too far away to intervene. Madison was completely immobilized by shock, watching me take control of the platform she had falsely claimed as her own. I stepped right up to the transparent acrylic podium. A secondary hardwired microphone rested on the stand, completely independent of the wireless system the technician had killed. I leaned forward and tapped the metal mesh of the microphone twice. The sharp percussive thumps echoed like gunshots through the massive ballroom, instantly commanding the attention of every single person present. The whispering ceased immediately. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage, their eyes locked on me. I looked out over the glittering sea of the Greenwich elite, finding the undercover federal agents strategically positioned near the exits. I gripped the edges of the podium, feeling the cool, hard plastic beneath my palms. "Good evening," I said, my voice projecting crisp, cold, and perfectly clear across the silent ballroom. "My name is Stella, the sole owner of the estate that is currently funding this party, the mansion my parents live in, and the seed money for my brother-in-law's firm." The entire grand ballroom went dead silent. The stillness was absolute and suffocating. It was the kind of profound, heavy silence that only occurs when a massive, world-altering truth drops into a room built entirely on delicate lies. You could have heard a single champagne flute shatter on the marble floor. I turned my head slightly to look at Jamal. The charismatic, incredibly arrogant smile he had worn for the past hour vanished completely. It was utterly erased, entirely replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The blood drained from his face so rapidly that his skin took on a sickening ashen pallor. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows, listening to the executioner pull the lever. His hands began to tremble violently, causing the useless wireless microphone to rattle against his expensive gold watch. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of slick excuse or charming deflection, but his vocal cords completely failed him. No words came out. He was completely paralyzed by the undeniable reality projected on the 30-foot screens looming above us. The wealthy investors standing in the front rows began to murmur intensely among themselves. They pointed directly at the towering screens, reading the highlighted legal clauses that explicitly named me as the sole executor. The grand illusion my family had meticulously constructed over the past decade was unraveling right in front of their eyes. Every single person in that lavish ballroom now knew the fundamental truth. My father was not a prominent real estate tycoon. Madison was not a successful lifestyle influencer. They were merely caretakers living on borrowed time and stolen funds. I watched my parents struggling to push through the dense crowd near the elegant mahogany doors. Harrison's face was contorted in sheer panic. He wildly shoved past a group of elderly socialites, his custom tuxedo jacket tearing slightly at the seam. Cynthia stumbled behind him, clutching her diamond necklace as if the stones might suddenly turn to dust. They were desperately trying to reach the stage to stop me, but the sheer volume of confused, angry investors formed an impenetrable human barrier. They were completely trapped in the back of the room, forced to witness the absolute destruction of their fake high society empire. Jamal slowly lowered the useless wireless microphone to his side. His knees visibly buckled, forcing him to grip the edge of the acrylic podium to remain standing. His incredibly expensive bespoke suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume. The realization hit him with devastating force. He finally understood that I had not just hacked into his offshore banking records. I had orchestrated this entire spectacular downfall from the shadows. He looked into my cold, unwavering eyes and saw the absolute certainty of his impending ruin. He knew that I held the absolute power to completely destroy his entire pathetic life. I held a small black remote in my left hand. My thumb pressed the main button. The towering screens behind the paralyzed man shifted instantly, The dense legal text vanished. In its place, a massive, highly detailed schematic appeared. It was a digital map of his entire financial web. Bright red arrows connected a central domestic bank account directly to dozens of offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas. Every single wire transfer was listed with its exact date, the corresponding routing number, and the staggering dollar amount. The numbers were massive, flashing in bright white against the dark background of the slide. I leaned back into the hard-wired microphone. My voice echoed across the frozen ballroom, slicing through the heavy air. Jamal does not have a revolutionary artificial intelligence trading algorithm, I announced, ensuring every single syllable hit with maximum impact. He does not have an advanced predictive software system. He is not beating the global markets. What he has is a classic, pathetic Ponzi scheme. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. Several of the wealthy investors in the front row physically recoiled, their faces shifting from confusion to dawning horror. I pressed the remote again. The screen zoomed in on a specific series of transactions. I highlighted the outgoing wire transfers from my grandfather's trust. I traced the bright red lines showing the stolen capital moving offshore, being laundered through fake corporate entities, and then flowing right back into the domestic accounts of the people standing in this very room. Your guaranteed quarterly dividends are a complete illusion. I continued, staring directly at an aggressive venture capitalist who had been cheering for Jamal just 10 minutes prior. You are not receiving real market profits. You are receiving stolen cash. Your dividends are being paid by money stolen directly from my grandfather's trust. Whenever any of you requested a withdrawal, my brother-in-law simply reached into my inheritance, wired the capital through his offshore shell companies, and handed my money to you under the guise of trading revenue. He is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I am Peter, am. Jamal frantically shook his head. He gripped the clear acrylic podium, his knuckles turning completely white. He opened his mouth, desperately trying to project his voice without the microphone. "She is lying!" he shouted, his voice cracking and failing to carry over the massive crowd. "These are fabricated documents. This is a targeted cyber attack on my firm. Do not listen to her. My algorithms are perfectly sound. We are generating record profits." I did not even look at him. I kept my eyes focused entirely on the crowd. I clicked the remote a third time. The screen split into two distinct columns. On the left side, I displayed the exact dates and amounts of the supposed dividend payouts Jamal had distributed to his top-tier clients over the last 2 years. On the right side, I displayed the corresponding withdrawals from the Charles Irrevocable Trust. The dates matched perfectly. The dollar amounts matched down to the very last cent. "Look at the screens," I commanded the room. "Check your own investment portfolios. Look at the exact dates you received your massive returns. Now look at the dates my father authorized those identical withdrawals from my estate. It is a 1-to-1 ratio. There is zero market activity. There are zero trades being executed. He is simply washing my family's money and handing it to you to keep this fraudulent house of cards standing." The absolute silence in the grand ballroom shattered into a million pieces. The shock evaporated, instantly replaced by explosive, uncontainable rage. The room erupted into sheer chaos. The wealthy elite of Greenwich, the politicians, the retirees, and the aggressive venture capitalists simultaneously realized they had been completely conned. They had handed over millions of dollars to a charismatic criminal. Dozens of cell phones were instantly yanked from expensive tuxedo pockets and designer clutches. Panic swept through the crowd like a raging wildfire. People were frantically dialing their personal brokers, their financial advisors, and their private bankers. Shouts of anger and disbelief echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "Where is my money?" an elderly socialite screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the stage. "I transferred $4 million to your fund yesterday morning." A group of broad-shouldered venture capitalists in the second row surged forward. They completely ignored the formal decorum of the event. They approached the edge of the elevated platform, their faces red with fury. They began shouting directly at Jamal, demanding immediate answers, demanding instantaneous access to their capital. Jamal stumbled backward away from the podium. His charismatic facade was entirely obliterated. He looked like a cornered animal frantically searching for an exit that did not exist. In the back of the massive ballroom, the situation was equally disastrous for my father. The crowd surrounding Harrison and Cynthia had turned completely hostile. They realized that my father had intentionally used his pristine social reputation to lure them directly into his son-in-law's criminal enterprise. They felt utterly betrayed by a man they considered a peer. Harrison tried to push his way toward the heavy mahogany doors, desperately attempting to escape the angry mob. "You vouched for him, Harrison," a prominent local politician yelled, blocking my father's path. "You swore this fund was fully vetted. You promised my retirement capital was secure. Where the hell is our money? I have nothing to do with this." Harrison stammered, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I am just an investor like all of you. My daughter is mentally unstable. She hacked these files to ruin us." Nobody believed a single word he said. The irrefutable evidence was glowing brightly on the 30-foot screens above them. The crowd continued to press inward, completely trapping my parents against the back wall. I stood firmly behind the podium, perfectly safe, watching the financial slaughterhouse operate exactly as planned. I stood firmly behind the podium, perfectly safe, watching the financial slaughterhouse operate exactly as planned. But my father was not ready to surrender. I saw movement from the back of the grand ballroom. Harrison had managed to break through the angry mob of investors. His face was pure, unhinged fury. He shoved a waiter aside, sending a silver tray of champagne glasses crashing to the marble floor, and sprinted down the center aisle toward the stage. He lunged directly at me, his hands reaching desperately for the hardwired microphone on the acrylic podium. "Stop listening to her," Harrison screamed, his voice raw and frantic. "She is insane. My daughter is mentally unstable. She is a bitter, jealous dropout who has spent the last 5 years obsessing over our success. She fabricated all of these documents to extort us. You have to believe me." I did not even flinch. Before his hands could even graze the microphone, my two corporate litigators stepped forward in perfect unison. The taller lawyer planted his hand squarely on my father's chest, shoving him backward with calculated force. Harrison stumbled, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the polished stage floor. "You cannot silence the truth with a temper tantrum," I said calmly into the microphone, my voice echoing above the roar of the crowd. "I am not unstable, Harrison. I am simply the only person in this room who bothered to look at the math." I raised my hand and pressed the button on the small black remote. The massive 30-foot projector screens behind me shifted instantly. The wire transfers vanished. In their place, a new set of highly classified documents illuminated the ballroom. It was the official mortgage application for the Greenwich estate. I had blown up the signature pages, highlighting the dates and the enormous loan amount in bright, unforgiving yellow. I turned my gaze directly onto my father, who was now breathing heavily, trapped between my lawyers and the edge of the stage. "You stood in the lobby 10 minutes ago and claimed you owned the very ground we are standing on," I announced. "But real wealth leaves a paper trail. 3 months ago, you went to a private lending institution. You submitted fabricated property deeds. You forged official trust documents to falsely present yourself as the sole owner of the Greenwich estate. You used my grandfather's mansion as collateral to secure a massive $4 million home equity payout." The crowd, already enraged by Jamal's exposed Ponzi scheme, turned their ferocious attention to Harrison. They stared at the undeniable proof of his desperation projected above him. "You cannot mortgage a house you do not own." "Dad," I declared, my voice ringing with absolute lethal authority. "That is federal mortgage fraud. It carries a mandatory federal prison sentence. You did not secure that loan for renovations. You took out that illegal mortgage because you were completely broke. You had to feed Jamal's collapsing criminal enterprise to keep your fake high society image afloat." But even $4 million was not enough to satisfy the black hole of his trading losses. Harrison opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and terrified. "Just a week ago, your fraudulent empire faced a catastrophic margin call." I continued, driving the final nail into his coffin. You needed immediate liquid cash to stop a regulatory audit. So you threw your own flesh and blood out into a freezing blizzard on Christmas Eve. You kicked me out into the snow to liquidate my apartment, to cover a margin call you could not pay. You sold my safety, cashed out my security deposit, and sold my lease to a wealthy foreign buyer just to keep yourselves safely out of federal prison. The wealthy investors looked at my father with utter revulsion. He was no longer a respected peer. He was a desperate, pathetic criminal who had sacrificed his own daughter to fund a scam. Cynthia, stripped of her arrogance and her fake elite status, let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Her legs gave out completely. She collapsed heavily into a velvet banquet chair, burying her face in her hands as the wealthy women she had spent years trying to impress stared down at her with undisguised disgust. On the other side of the room, near the grand staircase, Madison's pristine, highly curated world violently shattered. She stared at the projection of the mortgage documents, then looked at Jamal, who was still cowering near the edge of the stage. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. There was no venture capital. There were no record-breaking profits. Every single designer dress, every luxury vacation, and every bottle of vintage champagne had been purchased with stolen funds and illegal loans. Her fake billionaire lifestyle was entirely over. Madison's face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. She charged through the crowd toward the stage, her beaded gown tearing as she pushed past the angry investors. She pointed a manicured finger directly at her husband. "You lied to me!" Madison screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. "You told me the money was clean. You told me we were rich. You ruined my life, Jamal. You ruined everything." Jamal shrank back, raising his hands defensively as his wife continued to shriek at him. The golden child and the charismatic genius were publicly tearing each other to pieces. The family, that had spent decades meticulously crafting an image of absolute perfection, was now nothing more than a pathetic screaming spectacle of fraud and betrayal. I watched them unravel, feeling no sympathy, no sorrow, and no hesitation. They had dug their own graves with their greed, and I simply provided the shovels. I lowered the microphone, ready for the final phase of my plan to execute perfectly. Jamal had finally stopped looking at the glowing screens above him and started scanning the perimeter of the grand ballroom. His survival instincts were kicking in. He knew the angry mob of wealthy investors blocking the main entrance would physically tear him apart if he tried to push his way through the lobby. He needed a discreet exit. I watched his eyes dart toward the heavy velvet curtains lining the far left wall. Behind those thick crimson drapes lay the restricted service corridors used by the catering staff. It was a direct route to the underground parking garage and the loading docks. Jamal slowly backed away from the acrylic podium, stepping out of the harsh glare of the stage spotlight. Madison was still screaming hysterically at him, completely oblivious to his calculated retreat. He turned his shoulder, slipping past a towering floral arrangement, and made a desperate break for the shadows, practically sprinted toward the service doors, shoving a terrified waiter out of his path. He hit the swinging wooden doors with both hands, expecting to burst into the empty hallway and disappear into the night. But the doors did not yield. Instead, they violently blasted open from the other side, throwing Jamal backward onto the polished marble floor. The heavy wooden doors crashed against the walls with a deafening bang that instantly silenced the entire ballroom. A flood of tactical operatives poured into the lavish space. They wore dark tactical gear with bright yellow block letters emblazoned across their tactical vests, displaying the acronyms of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service. Criminal Investigation Division. Dozens of highly trained federal agents swarmed the perimeter instantly, securing every single exit and establishing absolute control over the room. Agent Mitchell marched straight through the service doors, his badge gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. He looked down at Jamal, who was frantically scrambling backward on the floor like a terrified crab trying to escape. "Get up!" Agent Mitchell commanded, his voice slicing through the frozen silence of the elite crowd. Jamal refused to comply. He scrambled to his feet and made a pathetic, desperate dash toward the kitchen entrance. He did not make it 3 steps. Two heavily armored tactical agents lunged forward and tackled him to the ground. The impact sent a sickening thud echoing across the massive room. They pinned Jamal face down against the expensive marble, twisting his arms forcefully behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like the ultimate gavel drop on his fraudulent empire. Madison watched her husband getting pinned to the floor by federal agents, her hands covering her mouth in sheer horror. She backed away slowly, desperately trying to distance herself from the man she had just proudly flaunted to millions of social media followers. Across the room, Agent Ramirez from the Internal Revenue Service led a secondary tactical squad directly toward the back of the ballroom. The sea of wealthy investors eagerly parted ways, eagerly clearing a wide path for the federal authorities. They pointed angry fingers at my father, eagerly serving him up to the law. Harrison stood completely paralyzed near the main entrance. His custom tuxedo was rumpled, his face shining with a thick layer of cold sweat. He looked around wildly, hoping to find a single friendly face among his country club peers. He found absolutely none, the elite society he had worshipped and sacrificed his own daughter to impress. Now looked at him with nothing but pure, unadulterated disgust. Agent Ramirez stopped, exactly 2 feet in front of Harrison. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his tactical belt and held them up. Harrison, you are under arrest for federal mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Agent Ramirez declared, his booming voice echoing throughout the silent, captivated ballroom. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Harrison refused to move. He stared at the federal agent with wild, panicked eyes. You cannot do this to me, Harrison stammered, his voice cracking pathetically. I am a respected member of this community. I know the mayor. I demand to speak to my attorney right now. Agent Ramirez did not entertain the desperate plea. He simply grabbed Harrison by the shoulder, spun him around roughly, and locked the steel cuffs securely around his wrists. The metallic sound echoed again, a perfect twin to the cuffs currently binding Jamal. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Ramirez recited loudly, ensuring every single wealthy investor in the room heard the undeniable reality of my father and his downfall. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The sheer humiliation of having his rights read aloud in front of the entire elite crowd was absolute devastation. Harrison hung his head in total defeat as the agents began marching him toward the main exit. Jamal was simultaneously hauled up from the marble floor and dragged down the center aisle. The 2 men who had ruled our family with an iron fist, who had mocked my career and thrown me out into a freezing blizzard, were now being paraded out of the hotel as common criminals. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers waiting outside painted their terrified faces in brilliant alternating colors. I stood perfectly still on the elevated stage, watching the tactical agents escort them out into the freezing winter night. The entire grand ballroom remained completely silent, bearing witness to the magnificent collapse. My trap had worked flawlessly. The crushing weight of their criminal actions had finally caught up to them both. I watched them disappear into the back of the police vehicles, knowing their long reign of terror was finally finished. The flashing lights faded into the distance as the heavy oak doors swung shut, sealing the grand ballroom. The silence inside was completely deafening. The hundreds of wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites did not linger. They practically sprinted toward the coat check and the valet station, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of a massive federal raid. Within 10 minutes, the lavish space was utterly abandoned. It looked like the aftermath of a hurricane. Half empty. Crystal champagne flutes littered the tables. Overturned chairs lay scattered across the expensive carpet. The towering ice sculptures were already melting, dripping steadily onto the marble floor. I remained standing perfectly still on the elevated stage, flanked by my two corporate litigators. I looked out over the glittering wreckage of my family's fraudulent empire. Only two guests remained in the massive ruined ballroom: my mother Cynthia and my younger sister Madison. The golden child was no longer glowing. Madison's heavily beaded designer gown was torn at the hem. Her perfectly styled hair clung to her face in messy, sweat-soaked strands. The fake billionaire lifestyle she had projected to millions of social media followers had just been dragged out the front door in handcuffs. She looked up at me from the floor, her eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. Madison did not stand up. She lacked the physical strength to even support her own weight. Instead, stripped of every ounce of her suffocating pride, she began to crawl. She literally dragged herself across the spilled champagne and discarded napkins, moving toward the edge of the stage where I stood. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She reached out with trembling hands, clutching the bottom rung of the wooden stairs. "Stella, please," Madison sobbed, her voice a high, hysterical shriek. "You have to help me. You have to protect me. I did not know anything about the Ponzi scheme, I swear to you." Stella Jamal lied to me. He told me the money was completely clean. He told me he was a genius. I am just an innocent victim in all of this. He ruined my life. I stared down at my younger sister. My expression was carved from solid ice. I did not feel a single drop of pity for the sobbing woman at my feet. I remembered the text message she had sent me just hours ago, mocking my living situation and threatening to have me physically thrown into the street. "Do not lie to me, Madison," I said, my voice dangerously soft, but carrying easily across the empty room. "I hacked into your personal corporate accounts. I tracked the fake brand sponsorships. I saw the direct deposits from Jamal's offshore shell companies. You knew exactly where the cash was coming from. You actively helped him launder my stolen inheritance just so you could post pictures of designer handbags on the internet. You are not a victim. You are a willing accomplice who got caught." Madison let out a gut-wrenching wail and buried her face in her arms, realizing her lies were completely useless against my forensic evidence. Cynthia finally managed to pull herself out of the velvet chair. My mother looked entirely broken. The arrogant, untouchable Greenwich socialite who had hurled my clothes into the snow on Christmas Eve was completely gone. She stumbled toward the stage, her diamond necklace looking absurdly out of place above her trembling, tear-stained face. She stopped right beside Madison, looking up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "Stella, look at what you have done!" Cynthia cried out, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were freezing. "Your father is in federal custody. They are going to lock him away. You have proven your point. You have shown everyone you are in control. Now you need to fix this. You need to access the trust fund right now." I looked at my mother, waiting for the inevitable manipulation. It came exactly as expected. "We are your family, Stella." Cynthia begged, her voice cracking with desperation. "Blood is thicker than anything else. You have to use the estate money to post bail for Harrison. You have to hire the best criminal defense attorneys in New York to fight these charges. You cannot let your own father go to federal prison. We are a family, and family protects each other. You have hundreds of millions of dollars now. A few million to save your father's life is nothing to you. Please, Stella, I am begging you as your mother. Show some mercy." I stood completely unmoved. The two litigators beside me remained silent, acting as stoic witnesses to the final collapse of my abusers. I looked down at the two women begging for salvation. I remembered the biting cold of the blizzard. I remembered the cheap plastic trash bag hitting my chest. I remembered the mocking laughter echoing from the warm hallway of the mansion as they locked me out into the dark. "Mercy," I repeated, testing the word on my tongue. "You want me to show you mercy? Because of family blood? Just a week ago, You terminated the lease on my apartment. You threw me out into a freezing winter storm with absolutely nothing. You liquidated my home to cover a margin call for a criminal. You watched Jamal throw a crumpled $50 bill at my feet and you laughed. Where was your loyalty to family blood then? Cynthia gasped, stepping back. That was different, she stammered. We were trying to survive. And now so am I replied coldly. I am surviving by cutting out the cancer. You made your choices based purely on greed and malice. You worshipped a fraud and sacrificed your own daughter to protect your fragile social status. I will not spend a single penny to save Harrison from his crimes. He forged documents. He stole money. He belongs in prison. Now you get to live inside the terrible wreckage you created. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. Cynthia stared at me, her mouth trembling, unable to comprehend that her oldest daughter was refusing to bend. For my entire life, I had been the family shock absorber, the reliable punching bag they used to regulate their own miserable emotions. They expected that underlying obedience to remain intact, assuming I would inevitably cave to the overwhelming pressure of familial duty. But that version of me died the moment they locked me out in the snow. Madison remained on the floor, her ruined designer gown pooling around her knees. She looked up at me with smeared mascara, her breath catching in her throat as the finality of my decision settled into her mind. There would be no miraculous bailout. There would be no brilliant legal maneuver funded by my inheritance to save her husband. The golden child was finally experiencing the brutal, unforgiving consequences of reality. Cynthia tried to reach out one last time, her hand shaking as she extended it toward the stage. She opened her mouth desperately searching for the right combination of words to manipulate my conscience. She wanted to play the victim, to twist the narrative and make me feel responsible for their impending doom. I stepped back, severing the invisible tether she had held over me for 3 decades. I looked down at the 2 women who had made my existence a living nightmare. You spent years telling me I was a failure because I chose to build a legitimate career instead of marrying into money. I stated, my voice echoing off the empty marble walls. You constantly reminded me that I lacked the killer instinct required to succeed in your world. You called me a pathetic charity case. You told me I needed to stop relying on the family name and forge my own path. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting the weight of their own past insults crash down on them. You wanted me to learn how to be independent. I did. I slowly reached down and opened the clasp of my custom emerald green designer clutch. The small click of the metal hardware sounded incredibly loud in the deserted, wrecked ballroom. I reached inside the silk-lined compartment. My fingers bypassed the heavy black metal bank card and the brass safety deposit box key. Instead, I grabbed the single piece of currency I had kept folded in my pocket since Christmas Eve. I pulled out the exact same crumpled $50 bill Jamal had so arrogantly thrown at my feet in the snow. The green paper was still slightly wrinkled from the freezing moisture of the blizzard. It was the ultimate symbol of their breathtaking cruelty and their complete financial delusion. I held the bill up between my index and middle fingers, making sure both Cynthia and Madison could clearly see what it was. Madison recognized it immediately. A fresh wave of sheer terror washed over her tear-stained face as she remembered the exact context of this specific piece of currency. She remembered standing in the warm, glowing hallway of the mansion, laughing viciously alongside her criminal husband, while I stood shivering in the dark. I stepped to the very edge of the elevated wooden stage. I opened my fingers and simply let the $50 bill go. The crumpled paper fluttered slowly through the air, drifting downward like a dead leaf. It landed softly on the marble floor, resting right in front of Cynthia and Madison, amidst the spilled champagne and the scattered cocktail napkins. They both stared at the $50 bill as if it were a venomous snake. The physical manifestation of their karma had just been dropped directly into their laps. I leaned over the edge of the clear acrylic podium, locking eyes with my mother. I delivered my final decree with the absolute terrifying precision of a judge handing down a life sentence. Take an Uber to a homeless shelter, I commanded, tossing his exact insulting words right back into their faces. You have 24 hours before the sheriff executes the eviction notice on my property." Cynthia let out a sharp, devastated gasp, pressing her hands against her chest, as if she had been physically struck. Madison collapsed completely against the cold marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her arms. The mansion in Greenwich, the luxury cars, and every single asset tied to the estate were now legally frozen and fully under my direct command. They had exactly 1 day to pack whatever meager personal belongings they could carry before armed law enforcement officers arrived to forcibly remove them from the premises. They were officially bankrupt, universally disgraced, and entirely homeless. I did not wait to watch them cry or offer them any false, useless, unearned sympathy today. I had wasted enough of my life observing their pathetic theatrics and listening to their endless strings of manufactured excuses. I turned my back on my mother and my sister, adjusting the lapels of my tailored suit with steady, unbothered hands. I gave a brief, decisive nod to my 2 corporate litigators waiting patiently nearby. They seamlessly fell into step beside me, flanking me like an impenetrable shield of legal authority and absolute financial dominance. We walked together down the center aisle of the grand ballroom, our footsteps marching in perfect unison toward the massive double doors leading out to the lobby, leaving the chaos behind. The crystal chandeliers continued to cast a brilliant, mocking glow over the spectacular wreckage of the evening, illuminating the broken pieces of a fabricated dynasty. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the crisp, freezing winter night, breathing in the clean air. The icy wind hit my face, but I felt absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated warmth spreading through my entire body. The storm was finally over, and the sky was perfectly clear. The empire was mine to rule, and I would never apologize for it anymore. Months have passed since that freezing winter night, when I walked out of the grand ballroom and left my family to face their inevitable ruin. The federal justice system moves with a slow, grinding certainty when the evidence is absolute. Jamal and Harrison did not even make it to a dramatic courtroom trial. Faced with the insurmountable mountain of offshore routing logs, forged mortgage documents, and recorded confessions, I had handed directly to the federal task force. Their expensive defense attorneys immediately advised them to accept plea deals. Today, Jamal and my father are both serving lengthy sentences in a federal correctional institution. Harrison, the man who cared about nothing but his pristine social status and his standing at the exclusive country club, now wears a standard-issue uniform and adheres to a strict cell block schedule. His former golf partners were the first people to publicly testify against him, eager to reclaim their stolen investments and entirely distance themselves from his disgraced name. Jamal completely lost his charismatic swagger the moment the judge handed down his 20-year sentence for orchestrating the massive wire fraud and running a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. The fake financial genius is now locked away, entirely stripped of the offshore shell companies and the stolen inheritance he used to project his false power. The fallout for my mother and my younger sister was equally devastating, though their prison is entirely of their own making. Exactly 24 hours after the charity gala, the local sheriff arrived at the Greenwich estate to execute the legal eviction notice. Cynthia and Madison were physically escorted off the property, clutching whatever meager personal belongings they could fit into standard plastic bins. All the luxury cars were instantly repossessed by the trust. The designer wardrobes, imported furniture, and expensive jewelry were legally seized to pay back a fraction of the millions they had helped squander. They are now living together in a cramped, poorly lit 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Madison's fake billionaire lifestyle brand collapsed overnight. When the news of the federal raid hit the media, her millions of social media followers immediately turned on her, exposing her fake sponsorships and mocking her sudden downfall. She had to delete every single social media account to escape the relentless public humiliation. Cynthia, a woman who once considered it a profound tragedy if her imported caviar was served at the wrong temperature, now works long shifts as a retail associate just to pay her utility bills. The high society elite she worshipped completely shunned them both, erasing their names from every single guest list and charity board in the state. They have absolutely nothing left but each other and the bitter memory of their own greed. Meanwhile, my reality has transformed into something entirely different. I am sitting in the corner office of my secure, ultra-modern high-rise headquarters in the very center of Manhattan. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offer a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the city skyline, but I rarely spend my time looking out at the scenery. I am fully in control of my grandfather's billion-dollar empire, managing the vast portfolio of commercial real estate and liquid assets with the exact analytical precision he always knew I possessed. But I did not just step into his shoes to simply hoard wealth. I completely restructured the irrevocable trust to serve a much higher purpose. I used a significant portion of the capital to establish a specialized elite forensic accounting agency. I hired top-tier investigators, former federal agents, and brilliant financial analysts. We do not cater to the ultra-rich. Instead, we use our extensive resources and forensic skills to track down financial abusers. We actively hunt the men and women who hide assets, commit marital fraud, and exploit vulnerable people. We help victims who have been silenced, marginalized, and robbed by their own families find the exact same justice I found. Every single time we tear down a fraudulent shell company or recover stolen life savings for a desperate client, I feel a profound sense of validation. My grandfather wanted his legacy to mean something real, and I'm making absolutely certain that it does. The journey to this exact moment was incredibly painful, but it was also entirely necessary. For 33 years, I allowed the people who shared my bloodline to dictate my worth. I accepted their cruel insults, endured their blatant favoritism, and convinced myself that their toxic behavior was just a normal part of familial duty. I believed the vicious lie that because we shared the same genetics, I was somehow obligated to absorb their abuse and sacrifice my own happiness to keep the peace. I know now that biology does not grant anyone a free pass to destroy your spirit. Family is defined entirely by actions, by loyalty, by respect, and by the consistent choice to protect one another. True family does not exploit your kindness, sabotage your success, or throw you out into a freezing blizzard to cover up their own crimes. If you are currently trapped in a dynamic where your accomplishments are minimized, your boundaries are constantly violated, and your value is questioned, you must realize that you hold the power to walk away. Never let toxic people convince you that you are worthless just because you refuse to play their twisted, manipulative games. You are not required to set yourself on fire simply to keep your abusers warm. Your strength is not measured by how much pain you can silently endure, but by your absolute willingness to stand up, demand the truth, and reclaim the narrative of your own life. The moment you stop accepting their false reality is the exact moment you take back your power. You have the absolute right to demand respect, and you have the fundamental right to protect your own peace. You can build an incredible life entirely on your own terms, completely free from the heavy, suffocating weight of their impossible expectations. I built my empire from the ground up, and I transformed my darkest moment of betrayal into my greatest triumph. Have you ever had to expose a toxic family member? Tell me your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The harrowing journey of Stella serves as a profound reminder of one universal truth. Family is defined entirely by consistent loving actions, not merely by the random coincidence of genetics. For decades, society has conditioned us to believe that sharing a bloodline automatically requires endless forgiveness, unconditional loyalty, and the silent endurance of mistreatment. Stella's story violently shatters this dangerous illusion. When her parents and sister ruthlessly abandoned her in a freezing blizzard to protect a criminal enterprise, they proved that biological ties do not guarantee a safe harbor. The most critical lesson we can extract from this ordeal is the sheer power and absolute necessity of establishing unwavering boundaries. It is remarkably easy to fall into the trap of being the designated emotional sponge for a toxic family, constantly absorbing their cruelty simply to keep the peace. However, tolerating blatant disrespect only enables abusers and slowly erodes your own sense of self-worth. Stella did not find her freedom by begging for an apology or waiting for her family to magically change their manipulative ways. She found her freedom by completely severing the emotional tether that bound her to their impossible selfish expectations. True family members do not exploit your kindness, sabotage your achievements, or use your vulnerabilities as weapons against you. They show up, they respect your boundaries, and they celebrate your authentic self without hidden agendas. Stella's ultimate triumph was not merely claiming a financial empire. It was the powerful realization that she had the fundamental right to protect her own peace and walk away from a destructive environment. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire simply to keep toxic relatives warm. Evaluate your relationships today, establish firm boundaries, and unconditionally walk away from any environment that demands you sacrifice your self-worth.